Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming tonight. I'm Nick Neely, an assistant professor of English writing here at Eastern Oregon University and a member of the faculty of our low residency MFA program in creative writing. Welcome to this EOU Ars Poetica reading and conversation featuring poet, essayist, memoirist, and environmental activist Taylor Brorby. Tonight, Taylor will read and talk about his debut memoir, Boys in Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land, which came out last year from Liberate. He's beaming in from Salt Lake City, and we're super excited to have him. As people get settled, I'm just going to drop, let's see if I can, a few notes into the chat. I'll do that as I can, but we have a couple more Ars Poetica events coming up on February 8th. This one again on Zoom. Poet Sarah Eliza Johnson is going to be in conversation with MFA faculty member Christopher Condrich about her book Vapor. And I'll get that link into the chat. And then on Thursday, March 2nd, both of these events at 6 p.m. Pacific, essayist Adrienne Shirk is going to be in conversation with me again about her book, Heaven is a Place on Earth, Searching for an American Utopia. This one's going to be in person at the EOU library, but we'll also live stream it and make sure that you receive the link if you'd like to watch. And I just encourage you to check out our visiting writers page, which you can Google. We have a YouTube channel that you could follow, so you could see some of our older interviews, and we have a Twitter account that we hope to see thrive more and more this year. And I invite you to follow. As we begin, I also wanted to just offer a brief land acknowledgement, and I acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is an inadequate gesture by far, but it's a place to start from, to start conversations and move towards productive action. Many of us are in La Grande, where EOU is located. So I'd like to say we humbly acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land Eastern Oregon University is upon, the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce people. We celebrate their traditions, languages, and stories. We acknowledge their continuing connection to this land, water, and community, and pay our respects to these original stewards of Northeastern Oregon. Thank you. Here's how tonight will work. I'll introduce Taylor, and he's going to read for about 20 minutes, and then he and I will have a conversation for another 20 or 25 minutes. We hope you'll jump in at that point, or whenever you like with your questions. You can drop them into the Q&A box. Click the button on the bottom of your screen to bring it up, and I'll weave those in as we near the finish. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce Taylor Brorby. He's a friend and fantastic writer. Taylor, as I've mentioned, is the author of Boys in Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land, as well as Crude Poems, which is a book of poems, Coming Alive, a book of essays. And he's also the co-editor of Fracture, Essays, Poems, and Stories, a project he actually writes about in the book he'll talk about tonight. His work has been supported by grants and fellowships, including the national one from the National Book Critics Circle, the McDowell Colony, Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, Mesa Refuge in California, and others. His work has appeared in places like the Huffington Post, Orion, the North Dakota Quarterly, and in numerous anthologies. He regularly speaks all over the country on issues related to extractive economies, queerness, disability, and climate change. He's currently the Annie Tanner Clark Fellow in Environmental Humanities and Environmental Justice at the Tanner Humanities Center at the University of Utah in Salt Lake. And Taylor, we can't wait to hear you read, and we're so glad that you could be here tonight. We had anticipated having Taylor here in person in the fall, and unfortunately that had to be postponed at the last minute. So we're just pretending that he's here in the flesh, and I'm sure it will feel like it. Thanks, Taylor.
Well, thanks, Nick. Thank you so much for hosting me and for that generous welcome. And it's lovely to be with you all in the comfort of your own home. And I hope you're having a LaCroix or something a little stronger tonight, whatever you need. It should be a good rambunctious time. Just to echo Nick, feel free to put anything in the Q&A that you'd like to ask. I've been asked almost everything you can imagine. I'll just tell you up front, I do not currently have any tattoos, so I'll just get that one out of the way. But other than that, I'm happy to ask anything you'd like to know. So I want to take you back to my home state, and my home state before it was even called a state, or before we even had language as we knew it, the least visited state in the country. But I'm going to sort of weave tonight just some different themes from my book sort of early on, just to give you sort of a picture of what this kind of contains. So we'll start at the beginning. It's a very good place to start, as you know, from The Sound of Music. This is sort of echoing my dear friend Rachel Carson's way of writing here. So this is from the prologue. It's called Sea, S-E-A. Before it was an ocean of grasses, the prairie was a shallow sea. Salt water sloshed for millennia as rounded grains of quartz sand were swept from the dry land into the surf. When the quartz finally settled down into the beds, thousands of yards thick, trilobites, those bottom-feeding arthropods, crawled onto the large shelf of sand. Generation after generation of trilobites, a number stretching to near infinity, would die, covered by sediment, sludge, and mud. Weight and time then would transfigure the trilobites into a massive underground sea of gas and oil-rich rock. As the sediment settled, a large delta emerged. Swamps, lagoons, meandering rivers, and vast forested floodplains. Trees expanding 12 feet in diameter and more than 100 feet tall grew like a prehistoric version of the Everglades. Plants growing in the swamps, lagoons, and marshes perished. They too were submerged underwater. Oxygen could not exist in the shallow bowls of plant debris, so the plants were broken down slowly but inexorably by anaerobic bacteria. But a thick layer of plant material did not fully decompose, and vast beds of peat accumulated. The surrounding streams changed course, and when they did, sprinkled sand and silt atop the peat. Layer upon layer, some more than 50 feet deep, weighed down the peat beds that, over time, transformed into seams of lignite coal, only a few feet thick. Volcanoes shot ash into the atmosphere. The ash floated on the air streams. Ancient waterways flowing north and east carried silt and clay. Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, and other dinosaurs roamed the ancient verdant land. When a meteor struck what is now Mexico, the age of dinosaurs abruptly ceased. A blanket of dust and sand covering these creatures' thewy flesh. Ferns wilted and died. The weight of it all pressed the coal and oil down. Then came the great sheets of ice, miles thick from the north. Boulders were picked up like tennis balls and dropped along the way. The middle of what would become the North American continent was bulldozed and reshaped into a vast open plain. I just wanted to be a paleontologist growing up. That was the first career. Like kindergarten was when Jurassic Park dropped for me. So I totally had like a Jurassic Park backpack and a Jurassic Park colored pencil box and a lot of Triceratops, which was my favorite herbivore, and then velociraptors that would battle. And North Dakota is booming not only previously with oil, but with dinosaur digs. So if you want, you can look up Marmarth, North Dakota in southwestern North Dakota and go there to join field dig sites and scratch that Jurassic Park itch that you might have like me. But I want to take you to my home, a tiny, tiny town in a county where I imagine none of you have ever been, since North Dakota is the least visited state. My hometown of all things is called Center. I mean, what a sort of hubristic name for a tiny town of fewer than 600 people now. It's actually vying to be the center of the North American continent. It's rivaling this other town, Rugby, North Dakota, which has long claimed being the geographic center of North America. So I feel like I've got a lot of stake now in making Center a literary place, but here we go. Welcome to my home. Center is a place where people only end up. Socked in south central North Dakota, located in the middle of Oliver County, Center is a stone's throw from the 100th meridian, the rod of aridity that cleaves America between the luscious greens of the east and the mottled browns of the west. My hometown is where great trapeziums of buttes begin to break against the wash of sky. It's the small county seat and the only incorporated town. Center is where farmers begin to get supplanted by ranchers. Fields flow into mines. It is where dust kicks up. Center is an ecotone, a transitory region of change. As the town motto reminds visitors, it's better in Center. There is no stoplight in Center, no grocery store. Such necessities as milk, hot stuffed pizza, and 2-liter bottles of Coke are purchased at the corner stop, the one gas station in the county. When I was small, growing up in a trailer house on the south side of Center, it took me all of 10 minutes to pedal my bicycle across town to Grandpa and Grandma Brorby's. I went to the one school in the county with the same 22 other students in my grade, a lopsided division of 6 girls and 16 other boys. So even if you were unfortunately straight, the dating options were limited in my class, I'll just say that. There are 2 bars, a bank, a courthouse, and the small coal country community health center on Center's main street. There are 3 churches, but not even a motel. As a child, though, my world didn't feel small. I played baseball and spent my afternoons with Grandpa Hudson-Bueller fishing for bluegills or picking tart choke cherries. I wandered the grassy banks of the small Square Butte Creek, a squiggly stream that eventually empties into the wide Missouri River, looking for muskrat, heron, or beaver. Sometimes I'd spot a coyote loping in the distance. The prairie I grew up on teaches you to notice, to pay attention. The yoke of the sun as it slides across the dome of sky, streaking the world orange and indigo. The swish of grass in the afternoon breeze, the screech of a grackle. During the golden hour on the prairie, the North Dakota palette reveals the subtle differences between ochre and umber and sienna. And North Dakota can also be biblical in terms of the weather. Hailstones hurl from the sky, rain floods fields, tornadoes rip across the hills, blizzards kill cattle, heat chars crops. To the west of Center, a large dragline lumbers on as it breaks the soil, ripping lignite coal from underground. The men in Center fill the pews on Sunday and on Monday are back at the mine or the power plant, digging in the ground, heaving coal into large boilers, sending electricity to eastern North Dakota and western Minnesota. The men call Oliver County God's country, a land filled with ring-necked pheasants, deer, red-winged blackbirds. It's Eden, it's brimming, it's full of life. But each Monday and every day after, the men stumble into the 2 bars. Their suited hands grip cold beer, warm whiskey. Each year, North Dakota ranks first in binge drinking. High schoolers sneak bottles to hidden bonfire parties. Someone shoots off the road, is memorialized by a flowered wreath, and if they were nice, a crude wooden cross on a cottonwood tree on Highway 25 just before crossing the county line. Drinking is a way to numb the pain. the dissonance, the sound of the drag line, the rumble of the boiler, the blasphemy of the work that lies ahead. The story of North Dakota is then the story of self-destruction. Everything leaves North Dakota full and comes back empty. The only way I've understood my home is by getting out, escaping its crushing weight, watching the destruction now from the outside. In childhood, when I escaped to the hills with my tackle box and drawing paper, I told no friends. I kept it a secret, like a coal burning in my gut. Boys like playing Smear the Queer, King of the Hill, and Cowboys and Indians. I played too to fit in, hurled my body against small boned bodies atop lumpy snow mounds. I was reminded by my father that Brorbies never tap out. But the prairie I escaped to was a supple whirlwind of grass tilting in the wind, a symphony of sage-grouse song. Beaver tails slapped the water. I would cast spoons for northern pike in the Square Butte Creek. When the casting became boring, I pulled out my sketchbook and pencils and traced the bend of the creek against the white paper. I tried to create the world I wanted rather than the world as it was. A world of broken lignite and all too often broken people. On the playground, I asked friends to play tag or an imaginary game of pirates. Instead, the other boys sized one another up, divided into two lines, and threw footballs. They ran back and forth across the asphalt playground, slammed the ball hard against the ground when they scored a touchdown. I watched from a distance, wondering where I fit into the place I lived. I still cringe when I say I played with girls since I was constantly called a girl because I wanted to create my own games. I wanted room for my imagination. Throughout elementary school, on Halloween, those boys dressed like police officers, firefighters, and football players. I dressed not as Barbie, but as Dracula, or a wizard, or a pirate. Even then, I wanted a larger world. My classmates played a preconceived game in a world that was preordained for them. Chase a ball under Friday night lights, grow into men who dig coal from the ground, save for the Mexican cruise you've always wanted, retire when your body begins to break. There was something I too craved in that landscape, something soft, something I couldn't see in the human-made world. So I headed for the hills where badgers roamed, where pheasants tucked into marshy grass. There was diversity to the natural world that I could not find in my hometown. He's a dreamer. He's not a hard worker. He doesn't want to play football. The last section I'll read, the hardest thing for you writers out there, you probably relate to this too, is trying to figure out what the hell you're doing in your own book. So I don't even, my themes I think I'm working on, but someone would tell me otherwise, is the first thing you heard is more the natural world, sort of natural history writing. Then we get in my hometown there, a little bit more of my issues around growing up rural or working class or poor in those ways, and in places where few people have ever been, or maybe they even fear to go. And now we'll get more towards the subtitle. We'll get some homosexual material in our conversation tonight. But you're going to meet me in middle school here. This is maybe about a fifth of the way into this book. This is 8th grade me, and I don't think you'll need any context to sort of understand where we're at here. Cirrus clouds feathered the cerulean sky. I walked home a little after school had let out. I'd stayed late to practice music. In 8th grade, my band teacher, Mr. Rook, would write me notes to get out of study hall so that I could get away from classmates and play music. I stayed after school and practiced in a dinky practice room so that I didn't have to tiptoe around Dad as he slept before going in for work. I could wail and rock on my horn without worry. The practice room was next to the office of one of the school secretaries. Whenever I finished, packed up my saxophone, and closed the practice room door behind me, Mrs. Miller would crack her door and say, "It sounded even better than yesterday, Taylor." On this day, my saxophone bobbed up and down in its hard plastic case as I rounded the corner onto Prairie Avenue. I glanced to the west, past the stubble field and toward the weathered farmhouse with its rusty weather vane, the place I sometimes still passed whenever I needed a break from the reality of school to sink into the security of fishing for northern pike or watching red-tailed hawks circle high in the sky. I walked past Eric Johnson's house. Eric, who was in love with all things basketball and with whom I played on the team since fifth grade, had recently fallen in with Kai Martin, a pint-sized bully whose mission it was to mock me. Austin Berger, whose grandpa was a decades-long friend with Grandpa Hutzenbuehler, filled out the trio. Throughout eighth grade, I had started to be called gay or faggot, but I didn't really know what those words meant. I knew it wasn't good to be gay or to be a faggot from how the other boys said it. I didn't shut down so much as I tried to avoid. I asked teachers not to put me in groups with Kai, Eric, or Austin. Kai's stepdad, Walter, was the wrestling coach. Mark, my neighbor, stood up to Eric for me, but said he couldn't do anything about Kai since his stepdad did so much for him as his coach on the wrestling team. I told Eric I'd take his Adidas shoes and shove those stripes sideways up his ass, Mark told me. Eric eventually left me alone for a while, but after cajoling from Kai and Austin, he joined back in. Throughout eighth grade, my mother drove me to Bismarck for saxophone lessons. At the power plant, one of her coworkers had recommended a college student in Bismarck. He certainly made Zach better at saxophone. Zach actually enjoys practicing now, Mom's coworker had said to her. When Mom asked Mr. Rook, he told her that private lessons could do more for me than anything he could do in band class. On some level, my parents must have known I was struggling to fit in, that I looked forward to going away each weekend to speech competitions. In hindsight, I'm not sure they could afford my saxophone lessons, but my mother drove me an hour each way every week to sit in her car for a half hour, whether it rained or snowed, while I tried to master the A flat or F sharp scales. When I got home from school that day, I slowly opened the door. I floated like dusk to not risk waking Dad. With a quiet thud, I put down my saxophone and backpack. The house was still. The lights were off. The trees in the backyard had begun to bud, and the rooms inside the house had a matted glow. After a few minutes, I went downstairs to Dad's large safe in our hobby room, what Dad sometimes called our man cave. The safe didn't have a combination, was a large lever handle. He left it unlocked, so I didn't even need the key. Over the past year, I had taken up fly tying. Pheasant feathers, deer fur, small and large hooks were strewn on the forest green counter where I practiced making nymphs, caddis flies, and streamers. I pulled down the large lever and swung the safe open. Inside, in neat rows, lay our shotguns and rifles. My 20-gauge Winchester, which Dad had bought for me in fifth grade to take me pheasant hunting, rested at the front. I rubbed my hand along its sleek forearm. Earlier in the year, after I asked Mom and Dad if I could start taking lessons, they'd bought me an electric piano. "I hope you have a better teacher than I did," Dad said. "She used to hit me on the wrists with a ruler." I'd come home turn the volume low, or if I sensed there was something in the air that might wake Dad, plug in my headphones to practice. I'd lay my fingers across the instrument's sleek plastic keys, adjust the volume, and practice my scales. In my own muffled world of music, I could pound out the pain I felt pulsing throughout my body. But music wasn't working anymore. Behind my shotgun were Dad's 12 gauge and deer rifles. Uncle Greg, my father's older brother, had left Dad his pistols when he died a year earlier. I opened the black plastic case that held Uncle Greg's sleek black 9mm pistol. I checked the chamber and slipped a bullet in. I made sure the safety was on for the moment. I don't remember crying. I don't even remember feeling particularly sad as I came back up the stairs. The kitchen was warm, the dining room still. I went over to my backpack. Each pull of the zipper sounded loud. I stopped to make sure Dad hadn't woken. I pulled out my yellow science notebook, opened it to a new page, and drew 2 columns. Reasons to live, reasons to die. I sat for a few minutes and began to fill each column. The process wasn't quick, but it wasn't ponderous either. I remember listing Mom, Dad, my sister Tanya, and music under reasons to live. The only item I listed under reasons to die was because I am gay. We'll stop there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Taylor. That's a devastating passage. And there's several low moments in the book, and well, there are many, but that's one of the lowest. And one thing I admire about the book is the way you orchestrate such an emotional ride, right? That carries the reader. And maybe we can talk about that later. But just in thinking about, you shared with us 3 different threads of the book, which you see as sort of primary themes, as you call them. And I think in other contexts, you've shared that maybe initially you saw those as different writing projects, right? As maybe even separate books, and yet here in Boys in Oil we see them entwined and in really powerful way. And I wonder if you could just begin by maybe talking about the evolution of that thinking, and when those threads merged, and what the complexities are or were in that process.
Well, I think the hard thing about writing nonfiction that involves other people is trying your best to get it right, thou shalt not lie and stuff. And we can, arm wrestle and debate over, is the sky indigo, or is it more lavender, or is it periwinkle, or, things like this. But when people speak in nonfiction, that can become complicated when you're dealing with the human world too. I think a great thing about the time in which we're living, hopefully moving deeper into with memoir, is that it's moving, I hope, out of a sort of bastardized genre of only abuse narratives or addiction and recovery. Not that those are not important. We need those stories to exist. We need new stories around that to help us understand as time moves on, of course. The memoirs I like best are sort of multi-layered in these ways, where our lives aren't sort of defined by one event or siloed by one facet of who we are. I'm not just a gay man. I'm a first-generation college student. I grew up in rural America. I love pretentious things like fine dining and classical music. I know how to shoot a shotgun, things like this. So I think part of the complexity with a book such as mine is, I would never give such a writing prompt to a student, because how would you do it? Write an essay about coal mining, about being gay, about being a first generation, on and on and on the boxes go. But I think I finally just realized it's more like trying to create a mosaic. You can take these little pieces and start to try to work towards a form where you get an image of a whole. And at least if you're writing a lot, you can have a lot to pull from, and not everything went into this book. This book was much longer at different points, was much shorter at different points, but it became really important for me to put a memoir out there that explores environmental issues alongside queer issues, alongside rural issues. And all I had to do was tell my story. That's kind of the brilliant thing. You have to sort of get over the intellectual side and just say, I'm just trying to write a good story if I can.
There's your talk about kind of moving associatively, creating a mosaic makes me think of this beautiful, the way your first you enter the book for the human drama of it, slowly. You started with that deep time section, and interesting to think that Rachel Carson was an influence for you there. I hadn't seen that exactly, but it makes total sense. And then there are two short sections before we get to sort of childhood, and
Yeah.
the second one finishes, and yet the prairie, like memory, is powerful too. It is a collection of single varied grasses woven into an interlinked tapestry that secures soil in place. That's how I think of this book, like the woven roots of a symphony of grass. It's such a beautiful image, and I want to talk more about how it's almost synesthetic quality.
Mhm.
But I think it really nicely describes the form and how the book kind of flows. When did you hit upon that particular metaphor? Wedding the prairie to memory and to your story.
Yeah, well, as we know, the prairie is the most incredible bioregion we have on the
Agreed.
planet. And,
Agreed.
I will go to the mat until my dying day for this. People, as my dear friends know, I love to pick on people who brag about climbing mountains, or walking through a forest. But ask someone if they've traversed the prairie. We're talking like an 800 or 1,000 mile walk, through, well, most of it's gone, if we're being honest. At this point, it's been overlaid with big agriculture and stuff. But the prairie is so incredible, especially in terms of metaphor, in its state of ecological utility, if you want to frame it that way. 100 acres of prairie can support over 3,000 species of insect, just insect alone. It's incredible, not even talking about larger fauna, for instance, in those areas. And to me, it's such a helpful metaphor for the times we're in, especially knowing that the prairie is largely what we call middle America or rural America, and nature models for us diversity. So how is it that then we've gotten sort of a monoculture of thinking this place is only good for what can be taken from it, coal, oil, people, things like this. And so I thought, it's such a helpful thing. I can feel like an individual. I'm one person, could make the metaphor, I'm one blade of grass. But to be healthy in a great environmental sense is I need a diversity of other grasses, other people around me. And I think if nature is giving us these models, if we pay attention to that, it reveals how fragile and sort of humorous our human-made systems that silo us and reduce us just to office jobs, for instance, where we do assembly line jobs like I've done, repetitive work. It's insulting compared to what nature models, sort of in a deceptive simplicity, a beautiful complexity. And I just thought that that would be a wonderful way to celebrate the landscape I grew up on.
It's quite beautiful. And there's also kind of an anomalous section later on where you talk about how difficult it is to pull up prairie grass, and that even as you try to, if this grass is a metaphor for you, as you just described, the difficulty of taking yourself away from home, the impossibility of that, these roots remain. I love when you came back to that image.
Thanks, Nick.
Let's see, where should we go? I think I'd love for you to talk about, the book is written in very short vignettes, for the most part, like 1 or 2 pages, and then some longer. And as you said, thinking about the art of memoir and orchestration of time, you weren't interested in sort of like a straight chronological memoir. Did you find yourself kind of shuffling sections quite a lot? Can you just talk about your process and finding this trail you take us through?
Yeah, I mean, I learned this trick from Uncle Walt Whitman. If you read Leaves of Grass, it's a handy sort of tool to think about structure and how you might mimic it in a book of prose, even though that poem is sizable and he kept working on it, as we know, of course. But that's kind of how I think of these things, as little blades of grass that then, you sort of weave together. I guess I do think of my book, though, as kind of chronological in a certain sense, where we begin, I mean, my story in my sense is so big, we have to begin 350 million years before my birth, just to get to my story. But then we sort of begin in my childhood, and then we move up almost to the present, while these other things are interspersed, for sure. Natural history, the oil boom, some North Dakota history, all of those things, of course. I have a great editor as part of how this really, I can't, for anyone out there, I just, in life, if you find editors at magazines or journals, like, never let them go, like, send them chocolates, be a needy person. I don't know what you have to do, but for me, the editor I have at Live Right, my publisher, he's really into opera, which I am not. I mean, I like opera, but not like he does. And I like symphonies, and he does too, but not like I do. What's helpful about having a good editor is they don't so much, I've found, tell you what to do, but give you an idea to think about. So when my editor, Bob, said in our initial conversation, look, Taylor, I view this book like a symphony, roughly 80-page movements or so, and how movements work. And it was like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. I know, like, if I can think of it as childhood, and I'm roughly moving you through 60 to 80 pages of that, movements in classical music, they don't have to accelerate, but they sort of increase in tension, and you don't end with a bomb. How some people, like when you're a younger writer, people think cliffhangers are great. They're not. Like, give me the cake, let me eat it, but that Bob would say, instead of ending with a bomb, you should end with a flourish, where maybe a reader feels like, I can put the book down, but man, I have to come back and find out what happens next. So I had help in thinking about that. And he really left it up to me that my mind is much more associative, or he would say aleatory, sort of wandering, natural sort of essayist move. It's really hard for me to sort of tell a straight story. And so part of this was kind of disciplining myself to say, okay, Taylor, when you want to make an associative leap, maybe that's a time to break this part and do the associative leap as a landscape writing. I don't know, whatever is working for me then. So I would try to find ways to give myself permission to be who I was, while knowing I could move some of that landscape writing in particular around. It wasn't necessarily vital that this is where that ended up compared to here, but to just think of how to not betray who I am as a writer. It's also just really hard. I mean, anyone who's out there as a writer, that's my hardest part. I have no problem generating. writing, revising is very hard. That fine tooth comb and coming back when I just like want to burn it all down, but you have to like try to get it to your best level, and you have a team to help you, but eh, you get by with help from your friends, Nick, I think is part of what.
Let's talk about that, because
Yeah.
I was reading your book. I was just so impressed with the kind of the ease and sturdiness and lyricism all at once in your prose. It just felt extremely honed. And you say the classic phrase, the fine tooth comb
Yeah.
has been swept over it. But can you
Yeah.
talk? Let's consider a paragraph. How does working in a paragraph go for you? And I always think, I once heard Barry Lopez say that he would read a paragraph, and when he came to something that didn't sound right to him, he would
Yes.
fix it, and then he would read the whole thing again from start to finish. So it was
Yeah.
this gradual combing. What's it like for you, this kind of tightening, but not too much of your
Yeah.
paragraphs? They come out just so mature and confident.
Yeah. I'm a big disciple of, Uncle E.B. White as well, who like I don't know that we were even taught grammar in Central North Dakota, or if we were, I missed that day. Like I could not diagram a sentence. I can tell you what a noun, verb, and adjective is, but after that, it's like, oh my God, dependent clause, like I'm going to have a stroke somehow. Oh, I'm an English professor. It is all by ear. And I think the ear knows, the ear, if something is clunky, it's not that I won't move on. I might move on, but I will make a note and then I will come back to it. But it is sort of this like private chanting exercise, that opening, the C section. The poets among us will know that it's written with a lot of S and C sounds, or C sounds that sound like S's. In poetry, we call that sibilance, and it evokes the idea of the sea. That's how this entire book is written, because when the wind blows through the prairie, it sounds like a sloshing sea. And so I was conscious of that when writing, that I wanted an auditory quality to my prose of a lot of S and C, or breeze creates that sonic quality that for me, the prairie is so alive. It churs and whirls and things blow around. I wanted that musical quality, and that for me as a writer, who's someone that's trying to render sentences that sing, the sonic quality is really important. Other writers will tell you, and it depends on your predisposition, I think. Some people want plots that really move. My life's relatively boring, I think. Like I like read, listen to NPR and classical music, like fall fly fishing, and then like sometimes get arrested. And like, but other than that, it's just kind of like, baking salmon and stuff. But there's a lot of this, it's really coming back to music for me, that I trust the ear, and I want it to sound good. Like I want it to sound good in the throat when it's being read out loud.
Yeah, you had such a lovely way of reading. So we can see that opening section as sort of setting the tone in a way, a kind of overture to the book. I like thinking about it that way. I'm glad you brought up music. This brings me to kind of the senses and the other arts that are so
Mhm.
present in the book. There's a motif all the way through of your love for, early on in childhood, love for painting, and we see it in the colors, the way you describe the prairie in such amazingly vivid and unique colors. And that the metaphor of painting, that image, in contrast to some other values in society, is carried all the way through the book. Same with music, right? You were a very accomplished musician until you still are, of course, and you have a love for music, but you lost your thumb, and
Mhm.
that changed your trajectory substantially. But talk about, how you thought about carrying those passions
Yeah.
through the book, how they bound the book, and what you intended in emphasizing them all along the way.
Yeah. Well, those other arts are so bedrock to me. I mean, I love reading, of course. I sort of devour books and eat them. The other arts are just so much higher in my mind than sentences in many ways. It's just, I'm sort of like a humble craftsman, and
Carry you. say
I
that.
know, I'm betraying my kind. I know. I just think, I mean, I haven't recovered since like first being exposed to the paintings of like J.M.W. Turner, the great British painter, or Van Gogh's thick brush strokes. For writers younger than me out there, you really got to link up to these gravy train things called artist residencies, especially for ones that have more than writers there. Because I like, if a writer is talking about their process, I'm just like, that would never work. Like, this person's a fool, But if a painter is talking about how to construct color on a page, my mind is like on fire. And I'm thinking, God, how would I do that in writing? So I regularly come back to these other, I love reading biographies about like Mozart or Beethoven or Brahms, or, thinking about Mark Rothko sitting there and staring at these crazy paintings that look like sunsets I grew up with, so there, in my mind, there's some conversation happening there. But to also illuminate, in my part of the world, people didn't do those things. Like, it turns out Center, North Dakota doesn't have a symphony orchestra. So when I wanted to be a symphony conductor in middle school, it's like, gotta go someplace else if I want to do that, or like, no one earned their living by painting in Center. Like, I was the token boy taking pastel classes with postmenopausal women. Like, literally, they were all in their 60s, farm wives who did this as a private hobby. They loved having a little boy, but I just thought, there's a world out there like Disney animators that this is what their life is. And those seemed so much more attainable to me in some ways than I never wanted to be a writer growing up. It's not that I wasn't somewhat bookish, but books weren't really encouraged. It was sort of like idle time is the devil's playground, where at least if I was like obsessively drawing Jafar, who I, apparently, couldn't get over in childhood.
Your sister helped you off.
Totally. My big sister was a great like model of how you could draw this guy, but that looked like doing something because there were pages and then they mounted, and it just felt really important to me in a book to try to reveal some of these other private passions that have really been sustaining to my life, because life isn't only about writing. It's also for me going to, art galleries or going to the orchestra or dancing to Kesha and things like this, things that bring you pleasure.
Well, it's just so abundantly clear, and I think of your list in the notebook that you read about. That's that scary list, and the
Yeah.
column reasons to live over the course of the book just fills and fills and fills, and that's triumphant, I think, for in the book, and so satisfying for readers. I think, I guess there's a couple. At first, I want to invite. We're running out of time because there's so many questions to ask. But audience, if you've got questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them. But I guess your memoir makes clear the scope of your ambition and your drive to succeed,
Mhm.
and the extent to which your parents really did support you.
Mhm.
As a child, going to great lengths, financially, and also investing in you, and then the tragedy of them being, really unable to accept it when you come out,
Right.
changing your relationship. But that's not really what I want to get at.
Yeah.
Is that you go to college. This is a way at it. You go to college thinking that, as you've been told in Center, that this is a means to a better job, to,
Yeah.
as you put it, you were sort of chasing prestige.
Yeah.
And as you were outed, and then you come out in other communities, you start to chase other things, and your calling shifts,
Mhm.
as it were. So I wonder if you could just talk more about this shift, and how what has counted as success, or what motivates, is still changing for you at this stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very change. I mean, in the past, this book dropped in early June of last year, and a more senior friend of mine in her 60s, a successful author, she had said, you're about to change. And you can't really understand that until you're in it. And if you have luck and the support of friends, I mean, this fall, there was a 3-week period where I was home for 36 hours. I basically did laundry and then went in. That all, like, I think in the social media landscape looks lovely. It's exhausting, and then when you write a book like mine at a time at which we're living, a lot of people tell you things, I think, in the book signing line that they've probably not said to other people. And that's a great privilege. It's also, even as an extreme extrovert, you come off of this sort of performance, a book reading or a lecture, things like that, and then you go back to your thing called a hotel room, and it's graveyard silent. And I now understand why like rock and roll musicians destroy their hotel rooms. You're just like vibrating at this high frequency, and there's not really a way to burn off the steam, like unless you want to like be on cocaine or become addicted to other substances or go for long late night walks like I have. But like this is so weird. This is like, be afraid, ye who enter here, if you want to be a writer of a certain ilk. I started developing like this screaming thing. This is so gauche to talk about, but like I would like wrap my head. I'm not kidding. I would wrap my head in a pillow and scream because it felt like I was exercising. I mean, here's a story from this fall without giving too many particulars. Like, again, great privilege to like fly in, have a book signing line, like 60 people deep, like person comes up to me in a wheeled device, like, here's the first 10 seconds. Hi, Mr. Brorby, thanks so much for coming here. I'm disabled, I'm non-binary, I'm borderline personality disorder. I came out to my mom last week, it didn't go well, what should I do? Like, I'm not a trained therapist, I don't know this person. If you read my book, not to give any, I don't think my book has spoilers or anything, but like, the hard thing you just heard at the end there, that's not the only suicidal ideation moment in my life. My parents and I do not speak presently. And so like my book isn't necessarily like happily ever after, because I think that's the complex thing in America is we're told your family will love you no matter what, and maybe they will, but that's not always true. My sort of half-baked theory is if you feel that your family loves you unconditionally, it's because they're continually choosing to love you. My family loved me. My parents, I have a great relationship with my sister. My parents loved me. They were wonderful until they weren't. And then it was just different and bad and things like this. But I think the weight of some of this, of the writing life, if you've had the privilege of this, it feels like a real important time to be out there to talk about I mean, like in La Grande, you're all in a community of 5,000 people, and like, how often are there like drag shows where people feel safe, and why shouldn't those exist, or drag story hours or things like this. And for me, I find it really important to be out there as a person from rural America, because rural America doesn't get many authors from it. It's really hard to make it out, to be ambitious, like you've asked, Nick, chasing success and how that shifted. What's been so nice since this book has come out is I've been inundated with messages from people who said like they were feeling like they read their own story and they had felt alone before. In like 1963, a woman wrote to C.S. Lewis, remember him, The Chronicles of Narnia, and said, Mr. Lewis, why is it we read? And he said, to know we're not alone. And I think right now there's a lot in America to make us feel lonely. We have states that are saying, don't say gay, that are trying to erase people like me, that have barely even had the ability to come out and be who they are in a public way. And so I think success for me, or ambition, is still rooted to writing books and getting out there. It's also just to help people feel less alone, because I think if you feel lonely, it's really hard to do the work you're called to do. If you're lonely, like when I felt lonely, I can't really do that much in my life. Like it's hard enough just to make like a good, healthy meal or to exercise. And so I think for me, what's been such a gift during this process is to realize how bedrock stories are for people. We might say, oh, people don't read anymore. Well, that's just not true. People read on their phones, they read on their smart watches. People are reading. It's just making sure that they get the stories they might need to sort of buoy themselves. And so I think that has been part of my ambition. Is, I mean, when you and I first became friends, Nick, I was such a religious zealot for nonfiction, which I still love. I haven't recovered. But now I'm just like
Say
hell
specific.
bent on writing novels, and because I realized the bookshelf of the Northern Great Plains doesn't have a lot of queer babies in it. So I got to populate that shelf, and hopefully other people will too.
Yeah, well, thank you for paving the way for others. And this is there. Maybe we've got time for just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
I'm gonna riff off one from Emma. She writes, "How did you feel when you finished writing this book?" And you've been talking.
Relieved. Sorry, but yeah, sorry. No, go
And,
ahead.
and was it therapeutic? Did it help you reflect on your experiences growing up?
Yeah.
And maybe when you were uh, reading about center, I thought, oh, center, like is memoir an act of centering, right? Or
Yeah.
is it actually a decentering act that is extension towards community, which you're
Yeah.
just kind of describing? So maybe that's bound into Emma's question.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say I didn't find it therapeutic. I've gone to a lot of therapy. I'm sort of the notorious anti-person for the F, like it's when you're preparing for publication, I think it's just a different thing. Like ask me 8 years ago, I would have been at a different place in my process, but now this wasn't necessarily therapeutic. Getting a book out felt like such a goddamn relief, to be honest. It was like, oh, thank God. Now can free up that whole region in my mind to try to at least do sentences of a different kind. I still have to deal with this book. I'm glad I still get to talk about this book. I hope this book follows me throughout my life. But that, for me, I went to therapy to get the therapeutic effects of what for me, needed to deal with. I didn't write this book for me. I've said elsewhere, I wrote the book I was looking for when I was 12. Like, I do think that's true. But the actual adult process of writing this, I wanted to get it published because I thought it could help other people. And that was my real goal. So it was less focused on me in that way. Though, man, Emma, when that book was done, I was like, oh my God, thank God it's done. Like I did it, And part of, sort of a snippet of a story, I was very nervous. I've only heard from one person direct. I've heard from a classmate in that small town of Center, and I've sort of been holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's not that I think I've been overly critical or this isn't like a burn it all down memoir, but I thought, oh man, people, especially in North Dakota, if you write anything less than glowing, they have sort of fragile egos. And I got an email from this classmate and I thought, oh God, here it is. The other shoe's dropping. And this person wrote and said, Taylor, I've never read a book so quickly. And I love, like multiple O's, loved it. And she had said, I've been recommending it to all my friends and family. And I thought for me, that was a real important educational moment because it shows how private we often have to live, especially in rural spaces, that, no one in central North Dakota is flying a rainbow flag or a Black Lives Matter flag. I mean, because the mayor, the sheriff, the city council people. And if their politics don't quite align with yours, that can make your life really hard. And do you want to move if your life gets hard? Do you have the financial capital to move? But that's also, I think, why sharing stories and why reading and why books are still so desperately important, is that for me, I never thought in that tiny class of mine that one day my classmate would write to me and say she loved my book and was recommending it to people. And I thought, you can't paint with such broad brushstrokes, which I think we're really being taught by how the media is portraying things right now, is that
Yeah.
people are, I think, complicated, and that's why we need literature and memoir. And so in some ways, to your therapeutic comment, Emma, it's been more like, my word, I think, is it's so gratifying to hear from other people, because it's not for me saying I'm important. It's just more giving me like ballast in my bow to know like other people need to be doing their writing, because this actually matters. Like people respond to this.
There's a beautiful moment late in your book where, and this is about your sort of emergence as a writer and public figure, where you return to North Dakota, and it's not to center, but to another small town and teach a lesson.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Mainly for retirees or however you phrase it. And then
Yeah.
there's one teenager, right, who
Yes.
had the day off from school and decided to join you, and you just sort of recognize a kindred spirit, and we feel there that you in this book are really sort of like passing the gift or a message, and that's sort of what you're just describing, I think at large there. Is that right?
I think so. Well, and thank you, Nick, for bringing that up. I mean, it's just a person never knows hardly what you're doing or where, when this student, this high school girl, took time out of her like school designated holiday to show up, to this kooky little Ginger's creative writing class in this tiny town, with everyone she's known forever other than me. I just thought this is someone special, or someone who needs something they might not be getting elsewhere, other than maybe online. It's a real gift to keep thinking like it's important to be going out into these places to help people know like it's possible and it's a good way to be living. You might not I have to teach, I don't earn my living from my writing. It's a great way to spend your time. And when you sort of encounter someone, for me, so young, who thinks it's worth their day off from school to listen to you for 2 hours, like, man, I have to double down on taking myself a little more seriously. It's really a real great privilege.
Well, maybe, if anyone ever has the opportunity to take a workshop with Taylor, you better, because it'll be a powerful experience. And Taylor, I think that's a good place to end. I mean, I've got tons more questions that
Yeah.
here and grittier, but
Yeah,
we'll have to do it some other time.
that sounds great.
I just want to thank everyone who was with us tonight. Thank you, Taylor. And also, I should say, Taylor's going to return to this forum in May, and with another author, and he'll be the interviewer then. So we're excited that Taylor's sort of with us as a visiting writer through the spring, and in that capacity, and in some other capacities with the MFA program. Thank you, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to Devon, who's behind the scenes helping us run this show. And thanks to everyone. We hope to see you on February 8th when Sarah Eliza Johnson will be reading and speaking with Christopher Condridge. Good night, everyone. Have a good one. Cheers, Taylor. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.